I don't really have anything other than, Paul, it's all yours.
Do I?
It's all yours.
Okay.
Are you done? Nope.
Okay. If you want to knock that down for a little
I'm
bit.
waiting for a Dawn that I've never
Um,
met to come tonight.
Oh, I'm Dan.
Basically, what I want to start talking about tonight is, I'm going to lead into time-lapse photography, but I'm going to start out with basically nighttime photography. And how many of you have done or attempted nighttime photography? Okay, most of you have. Okay, good. If you're like me, the first year that I did nighttime photography, some of it, especially the time-lapse that I thought was real good, I eventually learned was a bunch of crap. I underexposed stuff, which is really easy to do. But there's a number of things that whenever I go out, all of us have our own routines regarding photography. How we set up our equipment, how we leave it, what we do when we come back. And one of the things that I've learned to do, first of all, is when I go out on a job or go out on a shoot, let's say I'm going to go out and photograph the Milky Way someplace. First of all, one of the first things I try to remember to do is I turn the autofocus off. Okay, that is a biggie, because if you forget and something goes by and you're running a time lapse, it's going to cause the camera to focus on clouds or whatever else is going in, and you have no way of knowing it. You get home and you have a bunch of fuzzy images. The other thing is, most of you have probably discovered, your light meter won't work. And the reason for it is 98% of what's on your screen is either very dark blue or black. And your light meter in your camera is going to want to average that to 18% gray. So it's going to give you a 2-hour and 45-second exposure if you leave it that way. So basically, your autofocus isn't going to work and your light meter isn't going to work. So when I go out and I'm going to do something of the stars, typically I will set my exposure with a wide angle lens, and I'll get into this in more detail, at about 25 seconds. If I'm doing the moon, it'll be less than that, and I've got a bunch of exposures that I'll give you at that time. But the basic thing that I want to make sure is that people know to turn off the autofocus. And then the other part, especially with the current mirrorless cameras or the later generations of digital SLRs, make sure that you know how to kick on the live view. And my wife and I were up at Bass Lake photographing the eagles. And no matter what I did, I had a 500mm lens on. I could not get a crisp, sharp image. And my wife, Chris, had been doing it, and hers were coming out perfect. Okay, so at this point, what she was doing was she was activating live view, bringing it up, punching the button, and then manually focusing it, shut it down, shot the picture. Beautiful. So I had the mirror going up on the D850. I was doing all the things right with the cable release, and it still didn't come close to matching what she had. So important thing that live view on the back of the cameras for focusing is really important. And that's one of the things that before you go out, spend a little bit of time working with your camera so that you know how to operate these. So when you get into a dark room, basically is what you're dealing with out in the field, it is very frustrating to find where these buttons are. And if you've got things happening that are going away quickly, it can get real frustrating. So activate the live view, use the plus button and bring it up. You don't have to bring it up all the way. Sometimes it's ridiculous how much it'll let you bring up. But you'll be able to see, and with manual focus on the camera, you'll be able to see right away whether or not you're in focus. Okay? If you need to wear glasses or whatever, make sure that you're wearing them. But usually right on the screen, you're going to see right off the bat whether or not you're sharp. Once you've done that, and you can aim it at anything. You don't have to, if you're doing the Milky Way, pick the brightest star that you can see. It doesn't make any difference. Go through the process, run a test shot. Bring the test shot and bring it back up. And you'd be surprised, occasionally, even when doing all that, you may run up with a fuzzy image. And it's just got a fuzzy ball to it. You'll see a couple in here later that are in a demo that I have at the end. Some shots that I did in boating. where the Milky Way is not quite as sharp as it should be. And it's good to recognize that. Understand that when you go out, making mistakes are okay. They're not a problem. Every time I shot something and it came out the way I wanted, I patted myself on the back and I went on. But boy, the certain I make a mistake, I start tearing things apart and backtracking everything that I did. And that's how I came up with these steps. My friend Eric is with me tonight, and we have to almost hold each other's hand when we go out there because, did you turn off the autofocus? Oh yeah, and I click it. And sometimes, Eric knows, I've started a time lapse. It's got 1 or 2 frames going, and I reach other and I turn the autofocus on. Shut it down, start again. Because sometimes all it takes is that first shot, and that camera will back focus. And it doesn't take much at all to back focus. Because if I hadn't let that go, and that camera's doing a time lapse all night, I could have 700 images that are trash. They may look okay, but there you get them up on a computer screen, and right off the bat, they're just a little bit soft. Let's see. Next thing. How many of you have shot at night and basically had your color, when you get home, your color looks bad? Or it doesn't match what you remember. Any of you have that problem? Nobody? Okay. Well, I have, and usually that's because I have left it on the auto mode. I don't know about the other cameras, but I know that the Nikons on auto mode are just terrific. They just really don't miss it. But when it comes to nighttime photography, sometimes I'll get home and the files are a little bit warmer than what I would like. Now when I go out and I'm shooting the night sky, I shoot everything in RAW. There's a lot of information about that. Some people don't want to be bothered. It's like a political thing if you want. But the problem is that if you need to change the color or if you need to change the exposure, you're not going to be able to do it unless you shot in a raw format. So when I go out and I do 600 or 700 images, they're all in RAW. And if I've got to up a few things, and we'll talk about that later, like up the contrast, you can do it much easier if you're in RAW.
Well, just to clarify, you're talking about white balance, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, right. Thank you. What I have found for the night sky, and there's a matter of preference, so my suggestion is, if you got a place to go try it, and I set my color balance, white balance, to a Kelvin temperature. And I've set them anywhere between 3850 and 4350. Someplace in that range in there. That's 600 degrees in there, 500 degrees is pretty close to what's going to look good. Beyond that, it's kind of a personal preference. Now, in some cases, if I've been doing the moon and I've just let it at a daylight, that's okay, but as you'll see on some images later on that I show you, when the moon is low on the horizon, don't be surprised if it's yellow looking, because that's kind of what you will see. Moonrise or a moon set, and has to do with things that are in the atmosphere. The brighter it gets from a moonrise, or the higher it gets, the brighter it's going to get as well. So generally, when I start out, if I've got a moon that's just rising over something, and there'll be a still coming up here of that later on tonight, you will find that I tend to underexpose it just a little bit. Because if I'm doing a time lapse of it, by the time it gets to about 20 degrees, if I'm tracking it, the exposure is going to be, the brightness of the moon is going to be greatly increased. Let's see here. Okay, any questions about what we talked about so far? The Kelvin temperature, hopefully all of you know on your cameras about the autofocus. On most of the Nikon cameras, you'll find something to be either a place on the left front body. Yes, you had a question?
Oh, no.
Okay. Or on the lens. Either place, what you need to do, if your lens doesn't have that, you're going to need to get into the menu on your camera, and whatever lens you're going to be using, make sure that you know how to get to that. Because it's going to be really important to go ahead and turn that autofocus off. Okay. Locations are obviously really critical. On the western slope, it's getting real hard to find a really dark sky area. There's a couple of them that are behind Pine Flat that are east of Sanger and Reedley, and there's a couple of hills that will help to block the light from the city. But even if you go someplace and you're looking at it and say, yeah, this looks pretty dark, well, run a 25-second exposure at an ISO of maybe 2500 to 3200, and you will be surprised. You will see a lot more light in the sky than maybe you had anticipated. So most of you, if you've done any nighttime stuff, you've probably discovered that your camera is picking up way more than you see when you're there. Okay, both in detail and in areas that are in the shadow. But that said, if I'm going to get real serious about doing nighttime stuff, I usually go someplace on the eastern Sierras. Anywhere from Olancha area all the way to Mono Lake or Bridgeport area. And the only big area that you have to watch out for there would be the town of Mammoth. And that puts out a glow, but if you're 20 or 30 miles away, there's enough hills in there that you really won't pick up much light. Some light is good, and the reason for it, it will give you a separation between your sky and your hills. Otherwise, your foreground just leads up to a bunch of blackness, and it looks strange. So if you've got a little bit of light or spots of light in there, you'll see some of these later tonight, I think adds to that. There are filters that can drop most of that out. My friend Eric has one of those. Eric, what's that called?
Graduated density filter.
Well, it's not a neutral density. You've got one that blocks the color of the light.
It's called a red intensifier, but it knocks off the orange of
Okay, yeah.
Street lights.
Orange to orangish yellow, which is what most of the lights will see. And that has helped. We've shot side by side, and he's picked up a lot less lights than I have. I have gone over in the Coast Range to Penoche Pass. There's a little turnout about a mile away from Mercy Hot Springs. It's a little trailhead. You can park right there, and there are areas that are facing into where the Milky Way would come up now. It's probably already up this time of the year. That looks pretty dark. We went there last year, and we shot a few pictures in that area that came out pretty well. But up in the hills over here, there's so much light in the valley, and the Milky Way is going to be over here to the southeast to south. You're looking over Fresno, and if you get up any place in the mountains and look out, all you're going to see is this light. And from what you see there, you better add about 25 degrees to that. And right now, the problem is that the brighter portion of the Milky Way is going to start meshing with that. So, and how high you are doesn't make any difference. I've been up on Kaiser Ridge. I've been up at, I got a couple places up on the Tioga Pass Road. And that area, there's enough hills between it that it blocks most of it out. But essentially where I'm at, which is about 2 or 3 miles this side of Olmsted Point, and if any of you have shot night pictures from Olmsted Point, you'll see that in the cracks you're picking up some of the lights from the valley. And again, luckily, because it's so far away, it doesn't come up so high. But if we're on the western slope, and if you find a good place on the western slope, do me a favor, give me a call. Because I've really been frustrated with trying to find a good place on the western slope. There are some areas, again, in the Coast Range. I was on my way back from the coast one night, and I was just getting too tired driving, and when I get too tired driving, I pull off. And so I didn't want to pull off along 41 over there, so I pulled in a little mountain road that goes I don't know where. I pulled about 3/4 of a mile out, and it was during the summertime. Got up, walked around a little bit. It was nice. Looked up, and I was like, oh my God. There were the stars. It was gorgeous. So I know where the road is on a map. I have no idea where it was, but it was in one of those valleys before you go up through Cottonwood Pass. And I remember I was coming home, so I would have turned right, which would have made it east. And I could see probably, you know, it was a paved road. It had a name on it someplace or a number on it. Hello. And so that is an area that if I had to go to and I wanted to do a time lapse, should probably be good. Let's see here. Okay, the other thing is, if you've gotten to a place, and I'll give you the routine that I've gone to. I have a place out on the Tioga Pass Road that I will pull over. I can pull over in a little parking area, and I walk about 600 yards in. And mostly it's flat. Elevation is about, I don't know, 7,600 feet. And I walk out, go around this little bunch of trees, and there's this round dome sitting there. Gorgeous. And a few big boulders on it. And then across the valley, boom, there's Half Dome. So it's really, really nice. And obviously on dark nights, it's really dark. So what I'll usually do is I'll walk the camera out there on a tripod before it gets totally dark. Close to sunset, maybe a little bit after. And the idea is I want to set up my composition. I usually know about where the Milky Way is going to be. And I set all the controls on the camera, set a focus on it, and at that time what I'll usually do, I will use the autofocus and I'll focus on something that's the farthest away I can get. And then I turn the autofocus off. And then I'll leave it. Reset my camera, set my exposure settings, and once I've got that set, that's it. I go back to the car and wait for it to get dark. But the important part is you got to wait till it really gets dark, because from sunset, like right now, sunset, let's say, is about 7:35, something like that right now. It's really not going to be totally dark. It may be dark where you are, but it's not dark 100 miles up. The sunlight's still lighting it up. And if you make an exposure of it, you will discover that you'll get the stars, but you won't get a black sky. What you're going to get is a medium to light blue sky. And I've got a couple of clips in here that will show that transition. And it can look pretty, but you will see it go from blue to a dark color. So I have found that you've got to wait between 2 to 2.5 hours after sunset, and then you're going to be good. What this means in the summertime is, if sunset is at 8:20, now you're looking at maybe 10:20 before it's really safe to start the exposures. And by that time, you know, your Milky Way may be up about so. And when you're doing that, if you're going to do a time lapse, and I'll show you a couple tonight, that this bottom part is going to drag across. So when you set up your composition, don't set your Milky Way in the center of your frame. Now, if you're only going to do still shots, and you're going to do, you know, a couple an hour or something like that, then it doesn't make any difference. Set it wherever you need to. But if you're going to do a time lapse, you need to have room for that thing to go across your frame. And because if you don't, and you let the camera go all night, it goes off the frame. And when you try to play it, it makes you feel kind of stupid. How do you think I know that? Yeah.
You just heard about it.
Listen, I've made all the mistakes. Not some, not most, all of them. I think the only one I haven't made is I haven't left the house without clean formatted cards in the camera. Okay. But I've caught myself before I've left. So it's been close. So anyway, in terms of focal length for lenses, I have for both the Z cameras and the Nikon 850, I've got a 14 to 24 for each of those. I've also got a fixed 20 millimeter. But I don't always use the widest one. Mainly because in this place where I go, out on this knoll, there's pine trees on either side. And if I open that up to 14 millimeter, all of a sudden those pine trees come way in. and I don't want the pine trees coming this far in. If you start looking at the image, you want to take these things and move them out, you know. If I had to store it, it would be a 4.5, you know. So the exposure may be good, but the composition sucks. So I have found for me that I back off between about 16 to 17 millimeter. And I can do that during daylight because I know where I want those trees to be. And I'll take them so that they're in the frame. I want them because they help show the depth in the image when they are silhouetted against the sky. So once that happens, then I'm set to go. So that's generally the focal length that I have used. Now, talking about focal length of lenses, and this is going to relate to the exposure. How many of you have heard of the 500 rule? Good. Eric and one other person. I found something that I don't know yet. That's great. Okay. Exposure for lenses at night can be a real problem. And before I found out about this, it was hunt and peck and guess. And that's how I hunt and peck and guess a lot for the first year and turned out a lot of crap because I didn't know what I was doing. So the main problem that you run into is the Earth is moving. You pick up the Earth's rotation, and so what happens is you start getting a little bit of movement in your stars or your planets or whatever you're photographing at night. So you're going to be limited. So the answer to that is that you divide the focal length of the lens that you are using. If you're going to be using a 14 millimeter or 16 millimeter lens, divide that into 500. And that will tell you the longest exposure you can use without getting into star trails. Okay? And that works. It's never failed. Now, sometimes I have gone to the Mobius Arch in the Alabama Hills, and I've shot with a fixed 24 millimeter. That's probably the longest lens that I have typically used. And when I do that, I may only be able to run that for about a 22 second exposure because it's longer. But when I go out and I'm shooting with a 14 or 16 millimeter lens, typically what I do is I set the camera for a 25 second exposure, and my ISO generally is going to be between 3200 to 4000, with me favoring ISO 3200. I'm still enough old school that I'll try to shoot at the lowest ISO that I can get away with. Also, for any kind of nighttime stuff, one of the things that I've read about, and my experience tends to agree with that, is you're going to lose, with a long nighttime exposure, you're going to lose somewhere between 15 to 18% of your contrast. So one of the things that I typically do, if I've got 647 images, usually I will have one or two that is a test. So I will take one of those test exposures and I'll start working my sliders on it. I'll check my color, anything that I'm going to do before I'm going to do everything to those 647 images. But typically one of the things that I'll do is I'll increase the contrast. Sometimes, for whatever reason, that's the sky, what the color of the sky, in terms of particles that might be in there, that can change a little bit. That's the reason for the variation in the Kelvin temperature. Make whatever changes. The program that I'm usually using is the Nikon Studio program. It's designed to be used with the Nikon Z cameras and the Z9 cameras. But anything that will do that and work a raw file, you will be able to do that with. Once I've done that, and I'm satisfied I've got the raw files the way I want, then I'll start a conversion process and I'll convert them to a higher end JPEG. And that can take, a couple hours to do. Any questions so far? You're all ready to get your cameras and we'll go to the back part of Woodward Park tonight. Yes?
So your 500 rule, say if I took the 500 and I'm using a 20 millimeter lens, that would be 30 seconds.
Correct,
And that's how long I could go without the stars moving,
correct.
making a star trail.
Right. Now, there's one other thing, and there's a reason, I'm glad you brought this up, because there's a reason that typically I will do 25-second exposures. Because I've been doing time lapses for probably close to 10 years. The first year was a disaster, because when you're out there on a dark night, and whatever comes up on the back of your camera, I guarantee you is going to look really bright, okay? Because it's the only light you're seeing. The rest of it is dark. Well, the problem is, it's real easy to judge that and think you got a really good exposure, and in fact, it's underexposed by a stop and a half. Real easy. So I've learned from experience that I'll take my ISO up a little bit, and generally the aperture settings I will use, if I'm using a 2.8 lens, typically I'm using an aperture setting of 3.2 to 3.5.
So that rule works with whatever aperture setting you're using.
Correct. And
Because-
again, this is the reason that once you're in place, the last thing you're going to do is you're going to run a set of tests. Number one, you want to check focus. Number two, you want to check the color balance that you have, the white balance on your camera, and making sure you're not picking up any star tracks someplace. Now, I'm going to show you later on when we get involved, we talk a little bit more about nighttime time lapses. I'm going to show you from the Nikon camera, I've got pictures of an intervalometer setting, point by what I do. Now, a lot of your cameras will be able to produce for you a time-lapse movie. This is not what you want to do. Because when you play this thing back, the Milky Way is going to go like this. If you do clouds, they're going to look like it's a hurricane. I don't like that. I want something that's nice and gentle and easy to look at. Where there's clouds, I want to be able to watch these clouds move. I don't want to watch like it's the hurricane on the 6 o'clock news. And that's producing an image that's really all JPEGs. There's really not too much you're going to be able to do with it. I will put mine together in stills, and usually I use ProShow Producer Program, which that company is out of business now, but if you have bought the program, you can still download it, and all of your codes will still work to open it. So I'm glad that however they did that, that worked. Oh, we're good. Okay. Back again. So I came up with this 25 seconds for a reason. Number one, most cameras, the longest exposure that you can go to, and this has changed a little bit with some of the mirrorless cameras, but the longest exposure you could go to was going to be 30 seconds. After that, the camera reverted to a bulb position, which means you had to control it or turn it off or on manually. Now, there were some adapters you could get that had intervalometers in it, but really, once you get beyond about 30 seconds, you're going to run into too much time. What I discovered was, again, from making mistakes, is that with a digital SLR, we have a mirror flopping around in there. And after about 40 or 50 times, that mirror takes a certain amount of time. So what I used to set the camera on the intervalometer, I'll show you when I bring it up on the screen later, I would set it for a 25-second exposure, but an interval of 27 seconds. And I had a lot of people say, oh, that won't work because you got 2 seconds where there's nothing going on. So what? You don't see it. My stuff is generally nice and smooth with it. So that's kind of a moot issue. I don't know if the current mirrorless cameras with the electronic shutters, I don't know. I've only shot a couple of them with the mirrorless cameras, and I'm doing it the old way. I'm not willing to set it at 25 seconds with a 26-second interval. I'm just a little chicken for that, yes.
No, you talked about the mirror. Do you lock the mirror up when you're shooting your...
No.
You're letting it go ahead?
You've got to let it cycle.
It goes up
Yep.
quick for 25
Yep.
seconds, then it goes down.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And I made that mistake too. It locked it up. I have no idea why. I would think that it should, but it won't work that way.
Well, it has to get out of the way so the light can get to the film, or to
Yeah.
the sensor.
Yeah, so I ran one exposure, and after 45 seconds, I shut the camera off. It just locked it up. So, and I have no idea why, so I reverted back to what I'm doing. And again, like I said, with the mirrorless cameras, I'm shooting with Nikons, and I'm still shooting when I go out and do a nighttime time lapse. I'm still shooting at 25-second exposure. I may vary the ISO a little bit. I may vary the aperture a bit, but in most cases, I'm still shooting a 27-second interval. The only way to know for sure is to go out and shoot it and wait until you've got 100 exposures under your belt and see. If it's going right away, it should be okay. I don't know that it would make any difference. I've got a couple of clips that I'll be able to show you, and you can see they're nice and smooth. Some of the Milky Way, and a couple of them are of clouds, because there's a lot of things that you can do. Right now, we're talking about mostly the Milky Way, but there's a lot of things that you can do. I've gotten storm clouds that I've shot from my driveway this last winter. You look over the Sierras, you see all these clouds billowing up. I put on an 85 millimeter lens and said, let's go. So let's go do what? First of all, you can set, now you can use your autofocus to focus the initial image. But after you've got it focused, knock off the autofocus, because it will pick up movement from those clouds and it'll back focus on you. Or it'll continuously refocus. Eric had that problem. He's going to share he had a clip that he gave you where he had that problem when we were up in Yosemite. And beautiful exposures, but it just kept jumping. And you've got to be careful. So anytime you're doing a time lapse, daylight or not, once you've got your initial focus done, shut the autofocus off. And that'll keep you from having to do that. Now, one of the ones that is important is, what are you going to do about this? How much time are you going to need? If I'm doing something, let's say, we've already talked about the exposure, 25 seconds at about a 27-second interval. That would work good for anything that's moving in the sky. The Milky Way, anything like that. By the way, tonight, whether we're still here or you go home, I got up 2 mornings ago, and here come the satellites, right over the top of me. It was almost an hour, exactly an hour before sunrise, and they're going over tonight at about 8:46. There's going to be 55 of them. They're coming from the southeast, going to the northwest, and I think. But it should. Eric and I and Chris ran into this last year out at Mile High Point, and it was one of the most stunning things I've ever seen at night, because there was horizon to horizon. There must have been 60-some of them. So they're supposed to go right over the top of us tonight at about 8:46. So mark your calendars down for later tonight. And you know, I'm out near Sunnyside, and there's a lot of light pollution out there, and I've gone out a bunch of times and seen nothing. But the other morning, there they came, and it was really, really stunning. It took about 4 minutes for them to go all the way across. Yes?
There's an app you can put on your phone that tracks satellites and lets you know when they're going over the sky.
I've got one. It shows the loop when they're going, and I've got another one that actually will take it from my front yard and show me where they're going to look on the trees. And so far, it's been pretty accurate. They don't always match. Tonight, one app says 8:44, and the other one says 8:46. So just depends on when they're gonna start seeing it. So because tonight is when they'll be coming over. You know, when they hit the Earth side. Again, it's dark down here, but it's not dark up there. And I think that has been the problems. Once you get beyond hour and 20 minutes or so after sunset or before sunrise, it's still in the Earth shadow. They're going over it, we just can't see it. Or they're real faint. We've run into that a couple of Okay, let's see what else I've got here.
You talked about Tuesday, the 25th of the 2nd, but with an interval of 27. How do you get an interval of 27?
How do you get an interval?
Oh, yeah, huh?
I start with the intervalometer on the camera. I've got a whole set of pictures, I'll show you how to set it.
Oh,
There's a
okay.
place, there's a menu.
I shoot Canon, but
Yeah,
I don't know if they have interval. I haven't seen interval.
yeah. There, as far as I know, virtually all of the major digital SLRs or mirrorless cameras all have good intervalometers built into them.
Okay.
I know there's adapters that you can buy, there's plug-in intervalometers that you can use, and a lot of people have been using those, but at least the ones that I found with Nikon are working great. So I go all the way back to that with the D4.
Okay. Something new for me.
So, yeah, find where they are, and I got a place on here, that's the reason I got the pictures. You can find where they are in the menu in your camera. And if not, go to Home Photo and talk to Ryan or Brendan. They'll tell you.
Yeah.
Every time I buy a new camera, they know over the next few weeks I'll be in a dozen times. Because someone said that the new mirrorless, high-end mirrorless cameras, regardless of the maker, have more power, computer power than the space shuttle did. So that's how powerful these things are and how many they will, and what they will function and what they will do. We talked about the aperture setting, the 25 seconds. Okay, now I know where I want to be. If you're doing a daylight exposure, let's say that you want to get a sunset. You go up to the foothills, you got nice gentle rolling hills, and you want to get a picture of that light going down across there. Now what you're doing is you're picking up the Earth's rotation. That's really what you're doing. And more specifically, what you're doing is you're picking up the shadows that are lengthening. This is something that we can do here. You can do at the coast, any place. It's not worth starting up at noon for, but you might start it to an hour, hour and a half before sunset and let it go till after sunset. In that case, if I'm photographing anything that amounts to the Earth's rotation, I'm usually taking and making a 10-second exposure. No, I'm sorry. The interval is going to be 10 seconds. Okay, your exposure might be 125th of a second. All right, whatever it might be, 250 at f8 doesn't make any difference. Whatever the exposure is for that landscape, but your interval is going to be 10 seconds. So it's going to be taking an image every 10 seconds. All right, because what you're really picking up at that point is the Earth's rotation. And if you put that together, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, how you put it together in a program, you'll get a nice gentle flow with your shadows going across. Now, clouds are a different thing. And it's real easy to make a mistake. There's a lot of clouds we see, even today we saw some big white puffy clouds. I'll usually wait until we've got nice set of puffy clouds. There's definitely a direction that they're moving, but I want to be able to see some blue sky in there. Because without the blue sky, it becomes a mass of gray clouds. And unfortunately, I have several nice time lapses at Bass Lake of a mass of gray clouds. And you look at it, and it's done right, and I think, yeah, okay, there's just nothing in there that's moving me. So, and I've got a couple of examples of good ones here. But the question is now, you're no longer dealing with the Earth's rotation. Now you're dealing with clouds that are moving. So what I've learned to do through making numerous mistakes, I'll look at them and I think, oh wow, so the first thing I start doing is I look at a spot on the clouds and I'll count. 1, 2, and if I see very much movement in there, this tells me right off the bat that I'm probably going to have to set my interval at about 1 to 2 seconds. Occasionally, if they're barely moving, I'll go to 3 seconds. What I've learned that I have to do is look through the viewfinder of the camera, and this doesn't make any difference what focal length you're using. Look at the clouds that you are seeing that is closest in your view. Because the far ones that are farther away from you, your perception of movement isn't going to be as greater. What you're going to see is what's right in front of you. So that's what you need to count. And if you count 1, 2, I've done a lot where I've done 2-second intervals. And boy, that camera's really going at 1 frame every second. And your exposure may be, you know, 1/250th of a second at f11. It's bright, it's daylight out generally. And again, I've got several of them on here that you'll be able to look at. So what I will do on something like what we have here on the screen right now, this is my shot. I'll be watching these clouds. I'm not going to watch over here. This is several miles away. This is what I need to pay attention to. So you know what happens when I say, oh, this is so pretty, and I pay attention to over here. I've got several of them that are basically useless because I can't get the jump out of them because these are moving too fast. The rest of it's good, but the clouds are moving too fast. So, any questions on that? Okay, your interval is going to be determined by whatever you, whatever your count off is in whatever happens to be moving. Okay, let's start the first image over here on the stills. Okay, I'm going to backtrack with this. What this shot is, this over at the Mobius Arch just outside of Lone Pine in the Alabama Hills. This is in fact a nighttime exposure. It looks daylight, it's not. You can see the stars that are in there. But notice the sky is blue, it's not black. What we have is probably about a 35% moon that has come up over the Coastal Mountains. It's lit up the Sierras. This has got a 14mm lens on it. If any of you have been here, there's not much space to get in front of that rock. But it's lighting this up. This is a single frame out of a time lapse. And you'd be surprised how fast that shadow comes over to you. And pretty soon it lights up this whole thing really quick. But in this still image, a silhouette against something like this is another viable shoot to be able to do. And my exposure, again, is what I normally say, 25 seconds. Okay? If I want to do a still, that's all I need is a 25-second exposure. Okay, next image. Okay, we've all done the moon, I hope. This sometimes takes a little bit of, well, it varies according to where it is in the sky. This one here, the exposure was on this was f8, ISO was 400, and the shutter speed was 125th of a second. Quarter, half moons like this, I tend to really like because you pick up a lot of the detail on the surface of the moon. When you do a full moon, if you want to go to the next one for me, the full moon shot is flat. There's no detail on it. And this is what you get. I've learned that once you do, this is a single out of a time-lapse set that we did at Bass Lake, and I just happened to catch the fire lookout. It's a shot with a 500mm Nikon lens. And you pick up a little detail over here, but other than that, not much. And once it clears the horizon, because let me see what the exposure was. I wrote this down off the files. Yeah, the full moon was 160th of a second at f8. ISO was 400. And again, this is just off the horizon. Not very much. From a flat horizon, this is maybe 10 to 12 degrees up, just going over the hills. But once it goes up, and it won't go straight up, they're going to go up at an angle. Once that happens, you see it gets dull and boring. I hate to say it, because it goes up through your frame against black, that's it. So once it's cleared this, unless you get some where there's some clouds, and there have been times that I thought one of the best ones that I actually did from almost my backyard, and it was cloudy and I was almost going to give up and I was disgusted with it, but I was already set up. That turned out to be one of the best time lapses I ever got, because the moon's going up and these clouds are going in. You talk about spooky moon shots, and it went that way, all the way up. So what I thought was going to be a disaster because of the clouds that were going in, actually turned out to really make it a lot more interesting, because otherwise, this is just black, and that's it. So I try to always shoot someplace where I'm going to have something in the foreground for it to come up. Eric and I and Chris went last year over on G Street on the west side of Fresno, photographing a full moon rising behind the landscape of the city. And we were spread out a little bit, and we got some interesting things coming in that way. But again, once it got above the buildings, then basically you're pretty much done. Now, keep in mind, one of the reasons that I've done time lapses is not just to put them together. And when I did the city of Fresno, I wasn't planning. I don't think I ever put a time lapse video together. But every image you shoot is going to be just a little bit different. And we didn't shoot it with a real big lens. I think I shot it with a 70 to 200 millimeter lens, because I wanted more of the cityscape to go in it. But you never know what's going to happen, clouds, airplanes, whatever it might be. And with the camera going, meteor goes through. I've done several of those that I've gotten by accident, and the camera captured. So you'll be able to get something that whatever goes on during the time that you're shooting, that's another reason to be able to shoot those. I've set my camera for a time lapse if I have a lightning storm going on. And again, I'll set it for whatever time I think is good, and I'll add a second or two in for the intervalometer for the time difference of the images. Okay, next image. Yeah, this is a single exposure. This is the spot that I have that's on off the Tioga Pass Road. And I happen to use exposure time. I picked up 2 meteors. And I've got one, I don't know if I have it here tonight or not. I was up on the rock by the Mobius Arch. Ron Watamora from Horns was with us, and a couple of other people. He shot with one of me standing up there, and during the course of that 25 seconds, there are 6 different little meteors in that shot. So, and in August, anywhere between the last week in July through the middle of August, there's kind of a meteor shower that goes on, and you can pick up some of this kind of stuff. This is a good shot here because it will show you what happens. This is some of the lights that we're actually getting from the valley. All right, we're looking almost due west, and I would have to line up and see where this is. But you can see that if this was all dark, these trees would not stand out nearly as much as they are. Okay, next image. Okay. A lot more stars in this one. We're now up at the Patriarch Grove in the White Mountains, about 11,500 feet up. 3 different areas here where we're picking up light. This may very well be Las Vegas, and I've got an idea this right in here is most likely Mojave, and this over here is part of Bishop, because we're a little bit north of Bishop, facing in the direction. This was done, I think, June 12th, 13th, something like that. And again, I don't know where it was in the time on it, but by the time we finished shooting, the Milky Way was pretty much straight up. So it was dragging across quite a bit. I'm guessing to say this was probably somewhere around 1:30 to 2 o'clock in the morning. And by somewhere around 4 to 4:15 in June, we're getting close to the longest day of the year, the sky starts going light blue because you're starting to pick up daylight. Any questions about anything that I've covered here?
The light comes from the foreground.
The where now?
foreground stump?
Oh, this year, yeah, we had a little flashlight that we were using, one of the little small mag lights. I'm gonna get into light painting later on tonight, and that's what we use. Little regular incandescent bulbs. The LEDs are way too bright. I don't know anybody that's been able to control an LED light, no matter what they've done with it. They're just too strong. So the little small mag lights with 2 little AA batteries in it, that's what we use, and you'd be surprised what you can paint with it. Okay, next image. This was at Bass Lake, and this was in late August that we went there, and you can see where the Milky Way is quite a bit up. And we did this shot to have everything line up. Eric and I were over there probably around 3 to 3:15 in the morning. And we're facing pretty much right towards the valley. And you can see where this is, picking up some light across in here. This is the falls area at Bass Lake. They're on kind of a bit of a bridge that they have there. Next image. Okay, this one is, this is an HDR image. And the reason for it was, I wanted to have, I was shooting along with another photographer that does a much better job of this than I do, so it was my time to shut up and learn. And I discovered that from him shooting, if you want to get this detail and stuff in here, you really need to bracket your exposures. And what he will do, he will take them and he may do 9 stops where he'll have 4 on either side from his starting position and then 1 exposure. And he'll take whatever 3, 4, 5 of them he thinks will work the best and then combine them. I use an Aurora program, which is basically an HDR program, but I've got all the HDR-ish looking stuff turned off, so I want to get an image that's straight. And this is the end result from doing that. And right now, from what I understand, this is about the position of the Milky Way at night, right after it gets dark, right now at Bass Lake. And I would have gone a couple times, but the last time I was going to go, it was clouded over. So there was no way you were even going to see that. Any questions on this? Now, HDR stuff at night is something that is really good. You'll be able to bring out things in the shadow that you wouldn't ordinarily be able to see. Okay, next image. Okay, this is one of the 2 shots. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's another one someplace. I thought there was one over in here. It might be another image. There's 4 of them that are showing right away. This is different because we had somebody hiding on the other side of the rock that had a little LED light, and we had to run a number of tests because, again, this is our famous 25-second exposure. We weren't doing time lapses, but the length of the time was still the same. We did a 25-second exposure, and we had to determine that she had to cut that light off after 7 seconds. So we had somebody watching her, and we called out, "Okay, off," and she turned the light off. Otherwise, it overexposed us.
Okay, Paul.
Okay, next.
Alrighty. Okay. You're good to go.
All right, we're good. This is the same thing as the other image, only what happened here later on at night, we wanted to pick some clouds that come up. And the reason they have this warm glow is they're picking up lights from the town of Lone Pine. I'm good, thank you. Okay, next image. Okay, we're back to the Patriarch Grove now, about 11,000 feet. We picked up 1 meteor. What is really interesting about this, because this was shot with a 14mm lens, but when that meteor comes, it was bright, man. It went way over. You just don't see it over here, because it's making it, that's the distortion that you're picking up with the wide-angle lens. And again, you can see the brightness from the town's in here. This is another trip, not the same trip as we did before. Okay, next image. Okay, this is Lake Tenaya, which is close enough to the western slope of the Sierras, and we're looking straight down towards Yosemite Valley, and beyond that, you're going to pick up the lights from the San Joaquin Valley, and that's what you're seeing. It's brighter here because of those clouds. Those clouds are really about where the foothills would be, and so it was distinctive. It looked differently on a regular time or on a regular exposure. This area here would be darker like this, but down in here you would start seeing some other light. Okay, next image. Okay, another part of nighttime photography. Have any of you gone out and done anything like this, where you're photographing a building someplace? Okay, this is also a bracketed image. And the reason for it is this light was exceedingly bright. And what I wanted to pick up was light that was in the building that was on and things that were in here. And without bracketing them, you just wouldn't see them at all. They'd be gone. You wouldn't be able to pick them up. By the time you got a good exposure for here, you lose your shadow detail in here. And I think I bracketed this, I think 2 shots on either side. So a total of 5 images, and I think I actually put 3 of them together. There was no additional light painting or anything like this. But this is something that is really fun to do. Okay, next one. I got a couple of these in here. This was about a 2.5-second exposure. It's still relatively bright, but without the long exposure, you wouldn't be picking these things up in here, and then the light on this side of the building. This is out. All of these are out in Centerville. Next image. This is one again. She closed up early. We had to wait for her because they had a bunch of people coming and going. And we were hoping to pick up some lights. You still see a little bit in the store over here and in those windows. And we did a series of that night, but I kept this one here because I like the warm glow from the sunset, and it added to the separation on the trees. Okay, next one. Okay. Now this is light painting in Bodie. In this case, again, I'm using the focus on the camera. I'm using the autofocus. Once I do it, I'm focused on the building, I shut the autofocus off. Now what you can see is these stars are not quite as bright as the other ones would be. They're just a tad soft. Okay, and again, it's a 25-second exposure, but I may have painted this building for 10 seconds. And again, I use one of the little mag lights. Okay, next image. The distance that you're seeing over here in the clouds is again from the town of Mammoth. And again, I moved my light, I moved with the camera, well, I left the camera in position and I moved. I set it for a 30-second exposure, and I lit this up and I painted with this. And getting it from an angle is important because with the woodwork, it allows you to pick up some texture from the wood. Otherwise, all your lighting on it is going to become very flat. And again, just from the starlight, you can see there are some details that we're picking up in the shadows. This is at Bodie. Bodie is 8,300 feet. And it is possible to pick up detail on the ground from nothing more than starlight. Okay, next image. This one I did very little painting to the front of it, and I did the famous 25-second exposure, and I picked up the lights that were inside the store, the Boone store in Bodie. And people have gone into buildings and they've set off these small little LED lights. They use them at Christmas time or whatever, and you can plant them inside buildings that are vacant, and it will give a glow and stuff like this. Ryan Watermore has done several of those. I've done a couple of them. Okay, next image. I had to move quick on this one. I had 3 buildings to paint. I think it took me 3 tries to get them. Again, you can see this, the stars are a little bit soft, but I moved way over here and I deliberately painted the ground because otherwise the buildings look like a couple of gophers that came out of the ground. So I found that I needed to paint the foreground on it as well. And I wanted something that looked realistic. Well, the buildings were all closed up, so we couldn't get any lights on the inside of it at all. Okay, next one. This one here is an example of an image that came straight out of the camera, and this is what happens with your contrast. Notice that this isn't as snappy as some of the other ones. This one was straight out of the camera. I did no enhancing of anything. All I would do normally is I would increase the contrast about 15 to 18%. Okay, this may be the last one, isn't it? Or what do we have? Okay, we're back to that. Okay, let's go to the second one when I talk about time lapse. We're going to talk about the intervalometer, the next series. And they go pretty much right in order.
Time lapse, 7.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Let's hope it doesn't try to, you know, it's trying to open it up.
That's okay.
Well, it'll argue with me because it'll want a Wi-Fi. I'm trying to kill it.
Well, what this is going to show you while he's bringing up that image, this is going to show you what to look for in your camera's menu, where to find your intervalometer. There's a lot of times, again, these menus and these cameras get multi-layered, and it's real easy to get lost in them. Okay, this is the back of a Nikon Z7 II. It's the same thing, the same kind of a menu that you would find if you went all the way back to the Nikon D4. What you do is you look for this deal here where you're talking about your camera. Photo shooting menu. Whatever camera make you're using, that's the menu you want to go to. Okay? So you get into that menu, and I slide over to the first setting. You're not going to reset anything, but you need to go from here to here. Okay, next image. Now what you're going to do is you're going to scroll down through that menu until you come to something that says interval timing shooting. It's listed as being off. Well, what you're going to do is you're going to turn it on. What you want to avoid is, this is the one you don't want to go to, where it says time-lapse movie. This means it's going to put a time-lapse movie together for you. It's going to go real quick, and basically you're not going to be able to do anything to it. And if you get a nice image that you really like, too bad. You got no way of pulling them out. They're a relatively small file. So what you want to have is interval timer shooting. Next image. From there, when you get to that, when you activate that menu, this is what's going to come up. You go into the interval, and I have this set for 15 seconds. And I've got the number of shots as being 1001. I'm almost never going to go that far, but I have gone close to 900 before. If I'm doing a winter scene, winter nights are long, and I've kissed into the 900s a few times. Obviously, you got to make sure that you've got a good battery, or you've got a camera that has a battery pack on it that will hold, or a grip that will hold 1 or 2 batteries, or it's got one of the bigger batteries in it. Other than that, a normal camera with a normal battery, you can probably go 600 or 700 images, and you're most likely going to be okay with it. Okay, next image. Here we are with 15 seconds again, and that's going to be the interval between exposures. Now again, your exposure, if you were doing whatever you might be doing, I wanted something that would be able to be seen. If I was shooting in the night sky, this would be 25 seconds. And you can, with the arrows up and down, you can move it any way that you need to. Okay, next image. interval shot, again, is listed as a 1. The next step, once you have all that going, the next step you're gonna do, I usually disregard this. I don't get into the time of day or whatever. The next thing is you're gonna move it up to the start. Okay, next image. You hit start and then you hit the OK button. And it will start. And it will go from there. This is the point where it's critical that you've had your autofocus off. If you discover that you didn't shut it off, shut all this down. Because I guarantee you by the time it gets to the second or third frame, it's going to jump on you. I've never gotten away with it, ever. I don't know what it does, but the focus gods don't like it. Ha ha, we're going to mess you up. You're going to have to come back another night. So I make sure that before I hit that start button, I make sure that I've got that deal on the lens, the focus button turned off. Or turn it to manual, if you will. And once that's okay, then we hit the start button and you're set to go. Okay. And I think that's it for this group. Any questions about this? We're going to look at a few short clips. Yes?
Okay, so before you go to that window, the interval window, you've already set the camera to 25, 20.
Right. I've done we started talking earlier.
Yeah, you set
I've
the
gone out,
aperture, you
I've
set-
walked out to my location, I've set everything up, I've got the camera set to 25-second exposure, interval at 27 seconds. I've got my focus more or less set, and it isn't until I get to this point here that I run my focus test. That's when I focus on, I go through with the live view, I bring that up, I do a focus test, I do an actual shoot a picture. Once I've done all that, then I go to that menu.
Okay.
This is the last thing that you go to. I can set that menu up. So the only thing I need to do is scroll through it and hit start and I'm ready to go. And generally when I take the camera out there, that's what I do. All right? Okay, the next group. And these are going to be a couple of video clips that I did. Okay. Talked about doing this. I watched these clouds up in here. They're nice and smooth. It doesn't look like a hurricane is hitting. I like something like this because I can watch this. It's gentle and I like watching the clouds moving. It's just something that I like. This is just up here in the foothills on Road 208, which is about 1.5 miles east of the 22-mile house.
And what's your interval here?
Pardon me?
The interval?
The interval on this one here is about 3 seconds.
Top 3.
Yeah. And again, you can pick up shadows that are going across. It's just a nice little clip. Okay, next clip. Now they're coming right at you. This is just immediately south of the Alabama Hills, outside of Lone Pine. And we had a weather front that was coming in, and we've got Lone Pine Peak and Mount Whitney. And again, I'm watching this over here. And these clouds were moving along pretty good. It was 1 frame every 2 seconds. Okay, next clip. Now this other one might be a movie, I don't know. Yeah, you want to skip the season movie. Go to the Patriarch Road. Yeah, whatever you have there. Yeah, that's good. This is the time lapse from the Patriarch Road 2 years ago.
That's cool.
long did it take you to shoot it?
This went on until from about a quarter to 11, I think. The little streaks are airplanes. And there's the dawn coming up. That's what happens to the morning sky. It started getting light at about 4:15 in the morning.
Once a
That
while.
was the time on it. Okay, I don't want to belabor this too much because we're about 10 after 8. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what I like to do. I'm going to have you go ahead and play the Seasons movie. And if you've got some sound that you want to turn up on that, now we've got sound on it. But what he's going to show you and play for you is what I do with my stills, video clips, time lapses. It's my way of sharing with everybody what I like going out and doing.
Awfully rude.
The music on here came from a lady that is a composer. She's got about 5 or 6 CDs, and she hands them all to me and says, here, use them anywhere you want. So I put this together and I decided we're going to get brave. So I plastered it on Facebook. Well, Facebook has been known for taking down stuff with copyrighted music. My stuff is still up because I got it in there where it says music used with permission. And not only that, but I posted the movie on her Facebook page. So there's no way. So it's still there. I don't know, can I, for the other members of the camera club, can I post this on our site, Fresno Camera Club site? Does anybody know?
Yeah.
It will go up? Okay, then I'll post that. That way, if any of you want to look at it on your own computers or something at home and take a look at it. Yes?
All the pictures that you had where the movement was, were those with the intervals? Or were they time lapse?
No, some of those were computer generated. In other words, what we have is a still image.
Yeah.
And I've kind of swept through the still image to keep some movement and stuff going. But the time lapses and everything,
Well,
yeah,
it's
those
all about
were
the
all
clouds and things
Yeah.
like that, with time
Yeah.
lapse. With
Yeah, those
interval
were
or time lapse?
all, they're all regular clips like what you saw.
But were they time lapse or interval? Did you say
They were
you don't
time
like
lapse.
to use time
They were
lapse?
time lapse images.
Do that again?
They were all time lapse images with the
Time
clouds
lapse
moving.
intervals, okay.
Yes.
No, image.
Images. Images, oh, time lapse
Yeah,
images.
they were
all right.
created with maybe a 2-second, interval between maybe a, 250th of a second shot.
I guess what I'm asking, were you using the time lapse setting or the interval setting?
Interval setting.
Well, you're using both.
Using both.
Well,
Yeah, you got to have an interval between exposures, and then the exposure, instead of it being 25 seconds, is 1/250th of a second
Yeah,
for
okay.
daylight.
Let me see if, I think I understand what he's asking. He captured the images using the interval settings. He
Okay.
then took those images into another application and created the time-lapse movies, right?
Right,
There you go.
Okay, so the images were captured originally in intervals,
Right.
correct.
and then it was put into another.
They're all still images.
Right,
Yes.
and they went into so many seconds into
Right.
well, I remember you said something about.
Yeah, Pro Show Producer is what I use.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have that program. So.
Typically, when I put together something like that, and I have 500 images that I've done, typically what will happen is the still image will be on the frame for maybe 1 or 2 100ths of a second. And the interval between those two might be 6 to 8 hundredths of a second.
Mhm.
That allows them to blend through, and that's how you get the smooth look on it.
Right.
If your interval is too great between the images when you make them, there's too much movement in the clouds between frames, and you can't ever
Well,
get
it
it
gets
still.
jerky.
Yeah, it's jerky, yeah. Okay, I'm all done unless somebody has any questions.
Paul, do you want me to give this USB drive to
Yeah.
Elizabeth so that she can
You want to have them?
take the